Okay. All right. Hello and welcome to New Jersey News Now. For On New Jersey, I'm Laura Jones. We are closely following the latest developments surrounding U.S. Senator Bob Menendez. New Jersey's senior senator was arraigned in federal court today on corruption charges, along with his wife, Nadine. We are diving into the details surrounding the case, its implications, and the reactions it has sparked within the state and country. Menendez has been indicted on federal bribery charges for the second time in 10 years. The current charges include accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes in exchange for the senator's influence. He's also accused of providing sensitive information to the Egyptian government. Today, at his arraignment in federal court, Menendez and his wife pleaded not guilty. We have experts from the legal community as well as those in the political know here in New Jersey with reaction and analysis. First up, we have Anthony Iaculo. He is a criminal defense attorney and he is based out of Nutley, New Jersey. Anthony, we thank you so much for being here. It's good to see you.
Good to be here, Laura. Good to see you, Laura. How are you?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you. First, I want to talk about the presumption of innocence. All right, so Bob Menendez came out and said these allegations are just that. They're allegations. He said once the facts come out, he is going to be exonerated. First, though, what I want to do is walk you through what happened today. We had the arraignment. What's going on?
Well, the arraignment is the first step in the criminal process. It's what brings the charges before the court, before the judge. At this stage of the proceeding, the defendant will enter a plea. 99.9% of the time, it will be a not guilty plea. The significance of that is exactly just what it says, that the person is presumed innocent and he is asserting his right to claim he is innocent of the charges, and it is a substantial step in the process. What's going to happen next is they will set dates. They'll set dates for motions to be filed, for applications to be made by the defense and by the government alike, to address pretrial issues relating to the evidence as that evidence will unfold through the course of discovery when it's provided to the defense by the government.
All right, so from a procedure perspective, he got fingerprinted, mugshot. Does he have to surrender his passport? Okay, so what has happened to him today, like behind the scenes, what we're not seeing?
Well, that's exactly what happens to every criminal defendant. They will be processed on the charges. They will have the term they use, obviously, is the mugshot. Mugshot will be taken. And what will happen then is it'll be put, as they use the term, in the system. So it will, in fact, be something that is a normal step in the process for every criminal defendant, and especially, in cases that are higher profile. Obviously, that's a step that is, gets more notoriety than would normally be the case if it was a lesser a profile case.
Yeah. Well, will he have to surrender his passport? Are there any restrictions on what he can, where he can travel, what he can do? Do you know? Are you privy to that?
I don't know in this particular case. It is not unusual for a district court judge to require a passport to be surrendered, especially when a defendant will have ties to another country. And based upon the indictment, it does make allegations to another country, Egypt, and obviously Senator Menendez's wife, evidently based upon what is set forth in the indictment, did have ties with people that have affiliations with other countries. So I wouldn't be surprised if a passport surrender was made a condition of release in this particular case, as to pretty much all defendants.
Okay, so when you're looking at the evidence that's being produced by federal prosecutors, you had the photo of cash, you had the gold bars. It doesn't look good. However, Menendez said at the press conference the prosecution is sensationalizing. And when you take a look at it and try and look at it from an objective standpoint, right, I'm like, You laid out the jacket, you laid out the gold bars, you laid out the cash. It looks like you're about ready to post something on Instagram. So what do you have to say about, Menendez is saying the prosecution's cherry picking, they're making it look far worse than it is. What do you have to say?
Well, there's 2 points with that, and you bring up something that I noticed also in the indictment, and really the United States Attorney's Office in preparing this particular document really utilize photographs, which is not something that is common. That is done a lot of times with search warrant cases. If they're going to go to a home, they will use a photograph. So when the warrant is executed, the officers that go to the particular location could ascertain exactly that they are at the proper address. Here, the government used that as a sword against Menendez, Senator Menendez, and the other individuals charged, because they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Obviously, the way they calculated this, using the money laid out on his jacket or windbreaker, as it was, with his name on it, in the way that was done, in the gold bars. I don't know whether that had to be done, but obviously the government chose to do that. And obviously that paints a picture that a person looking at it, or looking at what was contained in that document, may have negative implications towards Senator Menendez. But again, these are allegations at these points. And we'll have to see how the actual evidence is when Senator Menendez, if he chooses, were to go to trial.
Right. So as a U.S. Senator, you do have power to have meetings, to advocate on issues. So can they, or do you think that defense will argue that these alleged actions, they're not a breach of duty and more a legitimate exercise of his power and influence as a senator legitimate?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how the defense will deal with certain aspects of the case, because you're right, it's very wide reaching. It deals with receiving cash payments. It also deals allegedly with payments being made with respect to mortgage, monies being funneled to different accounts. And it also deals with improper influence allegedly by the senator with respect to the United States Attorney's Office in New Jersey and the Attorney General's office. So I think the best way, and again, not seeing the evidence, but at least viewing the allegations, would be to take each battle based upon what is offered at that time and the best way you could defend it. And, if you win enough wars, hopefully you'll win the overall battle itself, and Senator Menendez would be found not guilty. But it is a long process, and it's going to be tough to see, at least at this juncture, how a defense would be mounted in totality.
Yeah,
But I think it would have to be addressed in sequence.
Yeah, I do want to talk about the timeline. First, though, I want to talk about his wife. She's also been charged. And when you read through the indictment, there are some things that kind of popped up on the radar, that she was receiving text messages from these three businessmen with ties to Egypt. And she was saying, hey, anything you need. Do you think it is possible? Because what I noticed, again, from a reporter perspective, is when Menendez went out on Monday at his press conference and said, hey, these are just allegations, he addressed a couple of the allegations. His wife wasn't standing by his side, and he didn't make any mention of her. Could be legitimate reasons why. But is it possible that blame could be shifted, for lack of a better word, to her in his defense to help him out? Well, my wife didn't understand. She took messages and she said that she shouldn't have. I mean, could he, for lack of a better words, throw her under the bus to help himself?
Well, that's tough for any defendant to do with respect to his wife. I think it becomes even tougher if you're a United States senator and somehow a jury would have some inclination or perceive that you are trying to deflect blame for yourself and put it on your wife. In co-defending cases, you always look at how far removed you are from the person that you're asserting or trying to, as you use the term, throw under the bus, put blame on someone else. And normally in a courtroom, finger pointing at each other with someone else sitting next to you does not normally work out well. And don't know how it's going to work out here. I don't know if that would be a defense strategy. You have very experienced attorneys in this case, but I would hesitate to think that Senator Menendez is going to point the finger at his wife in an attempt to exculpate himself from these charges.
Yeah, from a defense attorney's standpoint, were you surprised that Menendez came out at that press conference and specifically addressed some of the charges? He said, hey, that money, I earned that. It was from my personal account. I have that saved. I set it aside for personal reasons. And as for my record on Egypt, well, I've always stood up to human rights violations. Was that a good idea from your perspective as a defense attorney? I have to imagine, oh, maybe you shouldn't be getting out there and addressing specific charges.
Well, it reminds us of another political figure that's a defendant right now. A lot of times, a client doesn't follow an attorney's advice. Now, I don't know what the advice given from Senator Menendez's attorneys was to him, but I cannot imagine that it was go out there, make statements that could be recorded and be used against you potentially in the future. When an attorney goes out there and makes a statement, that cannot be used against his client. But when a person who is accused of an offense goes out there and makes a statement, it could be used against him.
Right.
So,
that's yeah.
Yeah, so
you think
that's
about your
really the
Miranda
problem.
rights. What you can say will be used against you. Yeah.
Exactly. And to come out this early in the case without knowing all of the evidence that exists, I cannot imagine that was a strategy undertaken by seasoned defense attorneys that are in this case. And, in the end, I guess we'll see,
Yeah.
if it helps or hurts the senator.
Yeah, after all the evidence has been so far presented, there didn't take much time. We talk about the presumption of innocence, but there's been a huge call, even from within his own party, to resign. So do you think he should? What message would that send? I mean, this is going to be a pretty all-consuming case, I would imagine. What do you think about that and the optics of it? Whether he resigns or not probably won't have an impact on what happens within the courthouse, the trial. But what about that public perception?
That's a great question because it's a balance. It's a balance between the perception and the optics of the public, all right, 12 of which will ultimately end up, if this goes to trial, sitting on the jury. I mean, the majority of people, I would think, would say, look, if you did nothing wrong, you shouldn't resign. So I get fully that school of thought. On the other side, I could see why people are calling for his resignation because of the allegations, the nature of the allegations, and obviously, the ability to defend a federal criminal case and still perform your duties as a United States senator. So, it is a tough balance. I understand Senator Menendez's decision not to resign. And I also understand people calling, within his own party for resignation and for his resignation. But that's the balance between a person fighting for their freedom and politics and other individuals that are obviously taking a position for either political reasons or because they honestly do believe, and that could be true, that he cannot perform the duties of a senator while engaging in the defense of federal criminal charges.
Well, Anthony, we thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, giving that perspective from a defense attorney. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. And we will probably be calling on you as this goes on because we're in for the long haul.
Absolutely. Good to see you. Thank you.
Good to see you too. All right, we're going to shift gears now to the political implications here. David Wildstein is the founder and editor of the New Jersey Globe. It is one of the most watched political websites in New Jersey. David joins us now. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Hey, Laura, and congratulations to all of you at On New Jersey. What you're stepping up and really increasing local news is so important. So thanks for doing that.
If anyone in the control room can hear me, I can't hear David. But what I can do is ask you a question, though, about, we were just talking about the legal process. So I want to know from you, David, what your reaction is to the growing number of calls for Menendez to resign. It didn't take very long for Governor Phil Murphy to come out. It took a little bit longer for Cory Booker, so I want to get your reaction to that.
Look, this is entirely different than it was the last time Senator Menendez was indicted. You had a huge number of party leaders and elected officials immediately releasing statements standing behind him. This time it was the exact opposite. It sent a very clear signal that the Democratic Party's no longer with him. They've had enough. And whether he is innocent or guilty, and they've all said that he deserves the presumption of innocence, that he deserves that right to go through a fair process. But they're not with him politically, and that's the big change here. And these are people like Cory Booker, Phil Murphy, Nick Scutari, longtime friends of Senator Menendez. Nobody is taking any joy in this at all. People, I mean, I've known Senator Menendez 35 years. We were young mayors together back in the 80s. I mean, this isn't a Schadenfreude type of situation. Nobody is happy about this. We all feel badly about it, especially his closest friends like Cory Booker and other U.S. senators. That just shows the magnitude of how people feel it's just time politically to move on.
Well, and I covered the first trial of Senator Bob Menendez, and Cory Booker actually came and testified as a character witness for him in that first trial. And I thought it was interesting that he took a few days to come up with his response, and then I thought his response was actually a pretty good one, saying, hey, I don't think that you can focus on your job. That was about as diplomatic of a statement as you could have come up with. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. It's hard. And look, I come at this probably differently than any other journalist, because it's no secret I've been through part of this myself during that Bridgegate issue. So I'm understanding the other side of it, and it is just incredibly difficult for your friends on what to say and how to handle it. And with Menendez, I mean, this is his entire world, and it's collapsing right in front of him. He's watching his friends abandon him, his career's in shambles. He's grieving right now, for himself, for his family, and I don't necessarily think he's wrong or I shouldn't say not wrong, but I'm not surprised that he's taking the position that he's taking right now. And let's just wait and see, and insisting his innocence. I'll tell you what I do know about Bob Menendez is there will be he is an incredibly pragmatic, strategic person. And at some point, pragmatic Bob will surface to the top. And I think he will then begin to look at these issues from a political standpoint, because from a legal standpoint, he shouldn't say anything at all. He should do, not put himself in a tough spot. But politically, I think he'll make his decisions based upon a critical exam of the realities that are facing him, rather than the emotion that you're seeing right now.
All right, and since you have been on the other side and you know what it's like to be accused of something, he went out on Monday and he was talking about the prosecution, saying more or less they're kind of inflaming things. They're not presenting the whole story. They're cherry picking what they want you to see, and they had those pictures out there. So do you think that, does he have a point? Do you think the prosecution, because there are a lot of people who are looking at the Department of Justice and saying, okay, they've indicted Trump multiple times, they're losing faith in the prosecution. Now, I mean, the evidence does look pretty overwhelming, but is that just maybe how they are framing it to make public opinion sway? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a prosecutor. It's hard to say that. And we, as members of the public, we haven't seen everything that the prosecutors have, and we haven't seen everything that Bob Menendez's lawyers are aware of. And I would imagine, again, I keep saying it, not a lawyer, but I would imagine, this is way, way too early for all of the discovery to have been handed over. I think what you're going to see now is a lot of hurry up and wait, and people are going to be spending a very long time waiting for new details, and then the most little thing that comes out is going to become big news. This is a long process. The last time Senator Menendez faced this, from the time of indictment to trial, was about 2 years. I think it's just going to be an incredibly long path before we have a lot of clarity.
Right. And then we have the election coming up in 2024. So I want to talk about, since you mentioned there might be a pragmatic side of him that, and maybe he does resign. So let's talk about what happens if the seat is vacated. And Governor Murphy then would get to appoint a replacement in New Jersey.
Right.
We are already talking about replacements. Article that ran on your website was that maybe even Tammy Murphy could be considered as a replacement. What can you tell us about that? Jockeying for position.
This isn't something that Governor Murphy thought about on Friday, that nobody ran into his office and said, Governor, Bob Menendez has been indicted. He could resign. What do we do? These rumors have been out there for a long time, and it's no surprise that this seat might have been on the table. So the governor's been thinking about it. His staff's been thinking about it. All of us have thought that this is a possibility. We won't know. The decision rests entirely with Bob Menendez as to whether he steps down or he doesn't step down. The Senate's not going to expel him. The United States Senate doesn't expel people based upon allegations. They expel people based upon a jury convicting somebody and the process being done. The very last thing that'll happen in a judicial process will be the United States Senate taking action to remove one of its own members. So we'll see. I don't know. But what we do know is that there's an election. Bob Menendez is up next year. And the difference between last time and this time is Senator Menendez faced these allegations early in his 6-year term. Now he's facing them late in his 6-year term. And this process, I mean, you might think, wow, this is until next November. We've got a long time, but we're about 5 months away from Democratic county committee members throughout the state holding conventions to award organization lines. And county committee members are going to vote based upon what they know now. And it's clear that Senator Menendez is not going to have a free ride in the primary. You already have Andy Kim in the race. You could have Tammy Murphy in the race. You could have other people in the race. And the timing could be off. And Laura, I know I do this to you all the time. I'm sorry, where I go back way, get my time capsule and go way back in time. But you have the story of Senator Harrison Williams of New Jersey, who was indicted in 1980 during the Abscam scandal of taking cash bribes on videotape from FBI sting operations, people dressed as Arab sheiks. He's walking out with the money. He proclaimed his innocence. He was convicted in 1981, said he was going to appeal it, continued to maintain his innocence, and remained in the United States Senate for more than a year after his conviction. And even that moves slowly. So Tom Kean, by the time Williams left, you had a new governor. It was a Republican, Tom Kean. He was in his second month as governor of New Jersey. And he had to appoint a caretaker because at that point, the U.S. Senate race was already underway, and he didn't want to put his thumb on a scale at that point in the process by picking one of the two candidates over the other.
Yeah. David, one other thing I want to talk about before we let you go, and that is the Senate's actions. They could take action the way they did with Bob Torricelli. They censured him.
Right.
Could they impeach Bob Torricelli? Could they censure him? Are there actions they could take, because the Senate is so closely divided? Could there be a political move to take action that way to force his hand?
I don't think so. They typically don't take action early when they moved against Torricelli, when they disciplined Bob Menendez the last time. They go last. And they're going to wait and see what the court's done. But one of the things that I found out yesterday, I thought was really interesting, because Joey Fox of the New Jersey Globe is now on Capitol Hill full time and talking to U.S. senators. There's no Republican support to move against Bob Menendez. From the Republican senators' standpoint, they like having Menendez there. That provides a target. It provides sort of a foil for the Republican Party with former President Trump. That Republicans have a presidential candidate who's under indictment. Well, the Democrats have a United States senator who's under indictment. So they need 2/3 of the Senate to remove one of their members, and there's zero indication that that's there.
All right, David Wildstein, we always appreciate your insight and analysis, and I love geeking out with you when it comes to the history of New Jersey politics, so feel free anytime.
Thanks, Laura. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. All right, next up, we have Jeanette Hoffman standing by. She is a media consultant and president of Marathon Public Affairs, a firm specializing in strategic communications and crisis communications. Jeanette, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm great, Laura. Thank you so much for having me on the show today. What an exciting day.
Right? I mean, it is. In New Jersey, here we are again. It's in another crisis. So I want to get your take on the way the public is viewing New Jersey. Here we go again. Right? We're in the headlines, and it usually isn't for something good. It's usually scandalous. Menendez beat the charges back in 2017. People reelected them, and here we go again.
Yeah, here we go again is right. I mean, I should say it's exciting and it's sad at the same time. And, you know, my son is going to college in South Carolina right now, and he's telling his dorm mates and his suite mates all about Menendez's charges and everything from the gold bars to the money sewn into suits. And they're like, what? Is this a Sopranos episode? Is this always happen in New Jersey? And he's kind of like, well, yeah, this is sadly politics as usual, but this is really unusual. I mean, this is the second time, as you know, that Bob Menendez is facing bribery charges. And this is just really egregious and sad. And, you know, as you and David talked about, half of his U.S. Senate colleagues on the Democratic side have already called for him to leave office. And, you know, what's really concerning to me about this whole thing is that he's being charged with selling out our country to Egypt in return for these bribes. So it's sadly a really disappointing day in New Jersey's history, but unfortunately not the first time that we're facing one of these corruption scandals, particularly from Bob Menendez.
From a PR perspective, I'm curious what you thought about his press conference. You know, I would think you would come out and say, less is more here. I'm going to, you know, presumed innocent until proven guilty. And kind of leave it at that. But no, he didn't leave it at that. He went to an explanation of, well, here's why I have the cash. I took out money from my personal savings account, and I have a good record with Egypt. You can go check it out. From a PR perspective, what did you think about that? Good move? Not so good move?
I didn't think it was a great move. First of all, I wouldn't even call that a press conference because he didn't take any questions from the press.
Right.
I would just call it, you know, typical Bob Menendez giving some remarks. He's, you know, he is a blustery guy. He kind of tells you how it's going to be. If you remember his last press conference, he said to his opponents, his political opponents, I'll remember all of you who were looking to jump in my grave, and you know, I'll get back at you, or something to that effect. I mean, he's, you know, constantly making these threats to people, you know, and the statements just don't add up. If I were his attorneys, I mean, I'm talking from a PR standpoint. From a legal standpoint, I can't imagine his attorneys were happy, you know, with what his remarks were. And, you know, I'll just say, you know, most people kind of had a laugh. Who leaves, you know, $500,000 in cash around their homes? You know, I think a lot of people had a good laugh at that, unfortunately. And, you know, fact of the matter is, the gold bars, they carry serial numbers with them. Those are easily traceable.
Right.
So, you know, I generally think from a crisis communication standpoint that less is more. You know, anything that you say can be used against you from a legal standpoint. Yeah. And, you know, he's really in damage control mode right now.
Serial number. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I just don't think it was a good move.
Serial numbers and fingerprints as well. I want to ask you how do you think this is going to shake out in the state politically? We're a blue state, but last governor's race, the Republican, Jack Ciattarelli, he came really, really close to beating Phil Murphy. You have Democrats saying you need to resign, you need to step aside. How does how is this rocking the political world in New Jersey? Is it helping Republicans? Too early to tell. What do you think?
Well, it sure is helping Republicans. Republicans right now are in the middle of a legislative race where a lot of pundits are looking at the polls and thinking Republicans can pick up some seats, if not possibly take back the legislature in Republican control. Phil Murphy has a record of, really expensive, disastrous policies of taxes, of, these mandates of, potentially taking away your gas stove, forcing you to drive an electric vehicle, banning gas-powered vehicles. And in a couple years, people are really upset about these parental notification policies that he's taking away from parents. So messaging wise, people are really starting to look at Republican candidates in the legislative elections and beyond, because Phil Murphy, can't run for governor. So statewide races, people are looking at Republican recruitment. And now you have this bombshell in Menendez. So the Senate seat could be wide open. So, in past years, Laura, we haven't elected a Republican to the United States Senate from New Jersey since 1972. So that's a big obstacle to overcome. So traditionally, you don't get strong Republicans running for the U.S. Senate because they think it's an uphill battle. But now with Senator Menendez looking to be really weak and, possibly not running, being an open field, I think you're going to get a lot of top tier Republican candidates looking to jump in and take advantage of this, Republican momentum here. Already, Congressman Jeff Van Drew from South Jersey has said he's looking possibly to explore a race for U.S. Senate. And I think you're going to see other Republicans as well looking to throw their hat in the ring and take advantage of this positive environment for Republicans.
Yeah, just one final thought from you. Were you surprised that, are you surprised at how quickly so many Democrats called for him to resign and are not just, because he did beat the charges last time. Were you surprised at all, or were you kind of expecting it?
Because so many of them were so quick to stand by his side at the last bribery charges and the last corruption charges, I was a little bit surprised, but then I read the actual indictment and how bad it is, and all the text messages and emails. I mean, it was basically spelling out the quid pro quo of Menendez and his wife saying, "We'll do this for you if you give us this much money, if you pay our mortgage, if you give me a new Mercedes." I mean, the indictment has so much evidence. The U.S. attorney spent so much time really making this a tight case against Menendez, whereas, the previous corruption charges, there was a lot of ambiguity of whether, these were gifts from a friend or was it really a quid pro quo? But I think this indictment, it really is a really tough case against Menendez, and it's very egregious. So sadly, I'm not surprised that it's very hard for Senator Menendez to do his job and represent the people of New Jersey with these tough charges against him.
Yeah, shocking, but maybe not necessarily surprising. Like you said, it reads like something out of The Sopranos. So. Jeanette Hoffman, thank you. Yeah, well, we look forward to having you back on, and we thank you so much for taking the time to give your insight and analysis today. Jeanette, thank you.
It's always great to be with you, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And we thank you for watching New Jersey News Now. I'm Laura Jones for On New Jersey. Stay with us as we continue our coverage on this and more right here.